So these behaviours that we're seeing with the bullying in marriages where one's bullying another, and what the bullying is, it's a repeated negative behaviour with the intention to hurt a person. It can come in forms of overt and covert bullying. Overt might be verbal abuse, where someone is putting someone down constantly, criticising, really diminishing that person. They can be destroying that person emotionally by the things that they're saying. We've also got physical bullying, where someone is actually beating someone up, slapping them, standing over them, all sorts of ways to frighten them physically so they stop a behaviour. We've got the covert bullying, which is undermining. It's very subtle, and that's actually extremely devastating, is subtle abuse. It can come through silent treatment as well, and deliberately making someone confused about what's going on. So stuff could be going on behind their back, could be what's happening. So covert's probably, I think, in my opinion, it's one of the most devastating, because the person turns on themselves in that they blame themselves. They get stuck in the situation is what happens. So what these behaviours do is they create that sense of powerlessness, where a person feels they don't have the power to fight back, or they're put at some disadvantage, or they're made to feel bad about who they are. In the case of, violence, where someone's life is taken, in this case it appears to have been a mental or a psychiatric issue in the person that killed her. Some people say, oh, you can't just wipe that under the carpet and use that as an excuse. Well, it is a reality in our society that mental health is happening to 1 in 4 people, and it is a really big problem. I believe it's coming from a toxic culture. I believe the economic system is forcing too many people to go to work. Those very important caring areas are breaking down. Parents aren't able to be at home with children. The solution to that has been childcare centres, but that breaks down the family even further, as the child doesn't have an experience of growing up in a home. They're growing up in an institution. This is institutionalising the very young. This is not how they learn deep, connected relationships. And I know when I travelled overseas, when I was on the Rotary Peace and Conflict Studies program in Bangkok, we had people from all over the world on that program, and in some countries they had incredibly loving relationships. It was all about the heart. It was all about passion. It was all about openness. In other cultures, it's highly suppressed, and what I've seen in my own culture, and this is also reflectively looking at other cultures by comparison, there can be a coldness in this culture. There can be warmth too, but what I've seen is certain narratives play out where we have very strong individualistic beliefs in self-reliance. That's a big one. And I've recently just had quite a long conflict with a family member where I was accused of not being self-reliant. And I'm in a homeless capacity, and it's like I am actually independent in my situation. I'm not asking anybody for anything. I'm not taking handouts, nothing. I'm not getting Centrelink. I have my own modus operandi where I only take if someone's giving to me of their own volition. I never say anything to make them feel sorry for me. I speak the truth about my situation, but I'm not asking for anything. I do have a spiritual life, and I trust that I'm doing what's right. I was cut off Centrelink because of a conscientious objection to corruption, what I see as rotting in the system. I also saw an ineffective system that wasn't meeting the true needs of the people who were on welfare. They're not all job seekers. There's a lot of complex social issues There are cultural issues, mental health issues. There are injuries that people have. There's a whole host of reasons why they are in need of a basic survival income. But because of the economic narrative, it gets overlaid over these social systems. As the ideology to privatise comes in, people are increasingly forced into compliance systems rather than democratic ones, where they have a right to say no. In other words, in these types of job provider systems, the person has to go for a job. Now, they may not even know what that employer is. They don't know who it is. It may be under the appropriate wage limit. I saw wages, $17 an hour. In the 1980s, I was paid $20 an hour. So you can see just the difference there. So we're talking casualised work. We're talking poverty wages. And this idea of no say over accepting or rejecting that offer. That to me was a dictatorial state, and I can't comply with what for me seemed like very much a totalitarian regime. I did write a report on democracy or compliance, and I went into an analysis on the meaning of work, meaningful work as well. And I looked at this idea of mutual obligation, but I also looked at the Constitution and the right to social security, which is a form of income. Now, I don't have that now. That right's been removed. I did ask to get my superannuation. I was refused by the Super Fund, and Human Services refused to assist me by even just writing a letter, because they'd cut me off income support. So they knew how long I'd been in that situation. But what was the real issue here was compassion, the lack of it. And it's because I believe they did not like me speaking up. And in a sense, that was me just speaking my truth, because that's who I am as a person, and I have to honour that first. I'm not a slave. Like those bonded labourers, I have no intention of complying to a system that turns me into a slave. I have a right to my own happiness. I have a right to self-determination and self-reliance, of course. I mean, everybody wants to be self-reliant, but the truth is we're in an interdependent society, and there are times in life when you've had great hardship, and I certainly have. I've had enormous hardship, where you may not be able to fully blossom with all your talents. Anybody needs to go to my website, have a look at what I've done. I've done a lot already, and most of that was for free. So if you go to Worldpeacefull, www.worldpeacefull.com, I've made enormous efforts to produce work that's going to be of service to my society, because I'm in service to society. I'm not here to take from that society in the sense of large sums of money, and I could make those large sums of money. I'm a trainer in anti-bullying. These people make a lot of money per day, thousands and thousands per day. Instead, I've made a choice to work on peace in a whole myriad of ways. And I've just had to understand certain conflicts that I've been involved in because they were of an abusive nature. So coming back to that powerlessness, this is what's driving the violence. So in our society, violence is a call for help. There's too much suppression. There's too much violence in the media. You can't sit back and say we want to create a safe world for women to walk on the street if you are saying nothing to the violence you're watching on TV. You might be playing incredibly violent video games. I was just informed that the guys who killed all those students at the Columbine school, Michael Moore produced the film Bowling for Columbine. You might want to have a look at that. I'll put the link below. Those guys were playing the game Doom, apparently, I was told. The guy I was talking to was a gamer himself, and he reckons it didn't impact him. But what he doesn't understand is that it creates an acceptance of violence because you've participated and it's been fun. These games were produced by the military, the US military, and they were simulations for soldiers, predominantly to train them. So I'm sure the US military is not going to use games unless they're effective. The fact that they've been rolled out into society with no critique, no regulation on the mental health or well-being of boys has been absolutely staggering to me. It's like implied within that war on the one hand is fully acceptable, and the funding of that war, the arms industry that comes up around that war. Australia is pitching itself to be, I think, the 5th largest arms supplier in the world. And this is what Bowling for Columbine was talking about. Michael Moore went to Lockheed Martin. He tried to make the point that here they are employing a lot of the people in Columbine in jobs that are producing weapons of war, and then he talks about the young people who killed these students and the rising number of these incidents in the United States. And then the right to bear arms. Well, on the one hand, people will say, well, we need to defend ourselves. On the other hand, the people are using the weapons to solve problems, and governments are using weapons to solve problems. In both cases, there has to be a rethink if you're serious about a society that's non-violent and that's safe for people. Violence is very primitive. People are hurt. People are killed as a result of mindsets that think you have to remove a problem through killing it, or an anger or frustration perhaps around women where this woman is attacked because this man feels angry at women maybe. We don't know what was driving the circumstances, but there is a lot of frustration and anger because people don't know how to resolve conflict at any level. We either project power to force power over other people, we either ignore them, go completely silent and make them suffer that way, or we become indifferent to their pain because we see so much violence on television, we just see another image flashing past ourselves. There's another war like Syria. I felt deep pain for what happened to Courtney, but I'm never lost on all the families killed in Syria or Afghanistan or Iraq or the Balkans or Rwanda, Sudan, up in Kashmir. These things are happening all over the world and thousands are being killed, but we feel nothing about that. Or we might think it's wrong, but we don't actually identify those deaths as if they're part of our own culture or our own family. And I suppose I care about what's happening to the people. I do. I care deeply about the public. Not just the Australian public, but I care about people in a lot of countries because I see them as me. When I was clowning on the streets, I saw everybody as myself. I had no judgment whatsoever when I connected with the people and brought joy into their lives. It was extraordinarily joyful for me to do that. I connected my humanity with theirs, and it didn't matter where they were from. I didn't care if they were Chinese, Indian, Spanish, American, English, Nepali. I love them all. Because when you come from a space of love and kindness, you see the beauty in everyone. It's really amazing. And I see, in a way, it is a blessing really in my life that I'm able to see like this. When I see so many people shut down, I see so many plugged in with their iPhones, I see so many who don't smile. We're losing our community big time. It's huge what's going on. So when you see people on the street, it's no surprise that that's happening. It's because the families are all breaking down and this is not being resolved. You can't just shunt people off into shelters. There's abuses going on in the shelters. There's abuses going on in the disabled area because they're vulnerable. There are abuses going on with the unemployed. People who have no family get abused. People who have been abused often can have situations occurring again in the future where they're abused again because of that sensed helplessness, that powerlessness they experience. Now, the suicide issue comes from a feeling of you have no way of protecting yourself. It's actually innate. There's a really strong biological need for safety. It's why we've all tended to congregate in groups, so we feel safe. We're very vulnerable as a species. We're incredibly resilient as well, but physically we're very vulnerable. Women are more vulnerable, obviously, than men. So there's this sense of not being safe. It's deep psychological. So when it comes down to being continuously abused by someone, it could be an overt abuse or it could be a silent one, which they call crazy making, where someone enjoys seeing that person suffering. They might see them as an object. That's a big one in abuse. They don't see the human because they don't feel that. They're looking at them in a dispassionate and cold, probably analytical way. They lost that feeling of compassion. This is a massive, massive issue for our society and other societies around the world. The loss of empathy is critical. That feeling of empathy is absolutely critical for our sense of well-being. If somebody's crying in front of you and you're just drifting off, and I've had that happen where someone's just drifted off because they feel no connection whatsoever. Or they say that you're weak. I was told that a long time ago. I was told that crying was weak, and I said, it's not. You're releasing toxins through the tears. It's human to cry. But we seem to have these attitudes of suck it up, don't cry, don't show your emotions. At work, I did a study with women in local government, men and women. I interviewed both. Women couldn't cry at work, they felt. They couldn't be human. When it was their time of the month, they're usually more emotional. Men can be quite critical of that, but this is the reality of the nature and how women try to cope with their emotions as well. Nowhere to cry. This is incredibly sad. What a society we've created here, where it's strong to show no feeling, to not care for people, to be indifferent. We tout success as selling all these things, which is only depleting the planet. We've got a planet in super distress because we're out of whack with what's natural with us. You know, I've had some pretty privileged insights in my own life. I've interviewed a professor from Dublin University who was, we had the discussion about nonviolence, and she was saying about the glorification of violence in culture. This is coming from a patriarchal type of society where the male type of thinking tends to be the dominant thought. Women don't think the same as men. We tend to be more communal. We're more communicative. We're very interested in dialogue. Men tend to be more silent, particularly in this culture. They shut down, they avoid, they deny, they move away from anything that might upset them. They prefer to get stuck into their work. These issues remain unresolved. Or we have women who are what I've called the masculine and the feminine exist in both men and women. You get some very masculinized women, or the masculine is very pronounced in that woman. In some men, the feminine is very strong, where they're very nurturing and they're very kind and very sensitive. But other men reject them. They see them as weak, and they're not. It's just diversity in both men and women. But that masculine projection is the one that typically is the bully, that typically puts power over others. Although some can manipulate through, in a sense, a manipulative type of victimhood, where they can get people to feel sorry for them and they can continue playing the victim in order to gain that sympathy, because there's a power in that too. These are all forms of violence that are very subtle. So the woman from Dublin University, we talked about violence in a range of forms. One of the key points she mentioned was that it wasn't men that were violent, it was the socialisation of men. And that's why I brought up issues like violent movies that become normalised in our society, that butchering and brutalising people is okay. There's also no narrative outside of that reflects on the impact. This is the real social impact. People, the consequence of a violent action. We just think they die and that's it. Well, what about all the family who suffer for the rest of their lives? What about those who are so shocked? We've got soldiers coming back from Afghanistan with PTSD and still going through great trauma because killing people is traumatic because it's not our nature to kill. And yet we still promote war. We still go and worship. And no offence to everybody, but Anzac Day, in my opinion, this is a war at the First World War. This is a celebration of a war where majority of the Turks in that particular theatre of war died, where there was absolute brutal butchering of each other in hand-to-hand combat. I've read narratives from the Anzacs who came back who were calling their leadership, I think they called them the heads. There was no respect for the ones in charge. There's also the argument that the Australian soldiers were used as cannon fodder. This is all violence. When I met Scott Ritter, the senior weapons inspector in Iraq, he's an American CIA operative. I interviewed him. I actually didn't interview him, but I spent 3 hours in a hotel room talking with him. In my case, it was about my real hope, peace, non-violence and anti-bullying program and being a clown and what that was like. But he gave a lecture at the University of Melbourne and he talked about war as disgusting and horrible. He felt it was necessary. I disagree with that. I believe for men, they seem to think that fighting in this way is the way of it. It's what we would say is the behaviour of tooth and claw. A Hobbesian worldview is, in international relations, is what it would be called. The libertarian or Lockean, these are philosophers that I'm quoting, worldview is one of proper judicial neutrality, using the rule of law, values, Bill of Rights, starting to create an international order where there is some sort of semblance of dignity and respect for diverse peoples. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was formulated in part with Eleanor Roosevelt, was in response to massive violence, 50 million plus, in the Second World War. This came out to accord people rights like the right to shelter, the right to freedom of association, the right to freedom of speech, the right to social security, the right to healthcare, the right to safety. There's a whole host of universal values. In fact, I can read some of them out, and I will do that right now because I've actually got a little book on Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I really like. I'll show you. It's this one here. So let's have a look at a few of them. Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Well, I've already experienced with senior management not being treated equal and in a spirit of, let's just say, we could say humanity even. I was treated with disrespect. Article 2, everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, colour, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty. Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, security of person. Article 4, no one should be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all its forms. Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Article 6, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Well, I've had the experience in this culture where I haven't been treated, certainly in inequality, which is the next one. Article 7, all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. Well, these articles are not enshrined in a Bill of Rights in Australian law, so they're not upheld. Of course, every person should be held equal before the law. That should be not needed to be enshrined in this. This should be something we would just ordinarily do if we're fair. The scales of justice is all about balance. That's why the woman holding the scales holds them evenly. It's about balance. Some people say, oh, equality of outcome is undesirable. No, it's not. It's called fairness. You treat people exactly in a fair way. To sit and discriminate and say, well, you're of lower status, you're of higher status, you're a female, you're a male, you're a person who's important, you're not. This is discrimination. This is what creates the environment for women to get attacked and killed, is because they're devalued. They're earning 80% of the male wage. This is significant. A man just spoke to me yesterday and said that he was sitting with another man watching television, and he said it came up as a script underneath the show that some dispute about 80% of the wage, of the male wage, is what women were earning, and he just scoffed. And he thought, oh, maybe he was agreeing with that, and he ended up opening a conversation with this guy to find out the guy goes, oh, God, they're all just carrying on about wages. Well, when you've had 200,000 years of being seen as subhuman in some countries, in many cases you're not seen as intelligent, you're seen as over-emotional, you're seen as a sex object. Look at the sex trafficking trade around the world, the child trafficking. There's some really serious issues here, and this is all coming out of powerlessness and perceived helplessness, where others are putting power over other people in a myriad of ways in order for them to feel some sort of power. It's about equalising the power. It's about balancing power. This is why democracy was created in the first place, was representation of the people by the people, in order to ensure fairness for all people, not one particular ideological group who believe they're born to rule, who think that the market does it better. Well, the market doesn't do it better, particularly within social areas. It is absolutely not doing it better because it has a profit motive associated with it. It doesn't have experts, it has investors. Or they may have some expertise if it's a job-related, business-related service, but then they may not have issues or abilities to deal with emotional issues that some of these people may be having. In other words, they're not able to respond appropriately to the human aspect of us. It's not about throwing money at issues and offloading it onto the private sector and calling that an outcome or a solution. The way these processes are configured is that there has to be certain outcomes, and it's typically has to be growth oriented. That then puts pressure on that particular agency to ensure that those people using that agency have the outcome that is wanted in order to get paid. This is very problematic. The whole point of government was to collect taxation, which it has in a whole myriad of ways. Wholesale sales tax, taxes on fuel. We've got all sorts of levies generated through export and import. We've got GST, income tax, company tax. It all goes on and on. But these taxes were all gathered in order to provide these services for those vulnerable. And there's a lot of women using these services. Going back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if we look again at men and women, Article 16, men and women of full age without any limitation due to race, nationality or religion have the right to marry and to found a family. They're entitled to equal rights as to marriage, during marriage and its dissolution. Marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. Well, we had arranged marriages in parts of the world. People married women in order to connect families. It wasn't for love. And yet that love is absolutely essential for the foundation of a functional family. And in fact, going right back to the very beginning of this, and I'm talking about, violence against women, talking about vulnerable people, bullying and what have you, this is all coming out of dysfunctional families where the love is not flowing freely and visibly so that children learn how to express love. Most people feel it, but they can't express it. Much of our frustration in our society is we're not able to offer the emotional help that's needed. It's not money that people need. They need to be heard. They need to be felt. They need to be acknowledged. They need to be valued as equal, not an economic unit. We don't want a Brave New World scenario where everyone's plugged into an NBN network with smart meters, all information being gathered and profiled on all these people for the benefit of advertisers, for the benefit of economics, not for the benefit of the privacy of the people, the dignity of the people, the sense of security that people feel and well-being. These things are absolutely fundamental, not only as human rights, but to be a fully functional, healthy human being, you have to feel safe. You have to feel that your life is private. You can talk privately to someone without someone tapping in and listening or recording what you're saying. You need to feel that if you have a problem, you can speak up. You're not going to be silently dealt with and then watched as a result of bringing up vital issues. You need to know that you're in a society that respects your freedom of speech, not just, editing legislation so that people can be more abusive to one another, saying offence is fine. Well, no, it's not. It's a form of violence. When you are deliberately seeking to offend another, you are catalysing a violent response. So who's to blame in that situation? The one who's responding or the one who's being unkind, who's being provocative? Because a certain group think another group are inferior or superior, or that a woman is inferior, a man is superior, or vice versa. Whenever we discriminate, this sets up that idea of powerlessness yet again. These are all the formulations of cultures of violence. We live in a culture of violence, not a culture of peace right now. Yes, things are sedated in that people are in rhythms of routine. In this country, many people are working, so they're very busy. But underneath the surface, there's great pain and suffering. I've worked in hundreds of companies. I've seen it in their faces. They're exhausted. People feel trapped. They don't feel they can say anything. They're being confronted with higher energy bills. And it's all very well to have a one-off cut to that energy bill, but when you've got in existence in the world free energy, why isn't that happening? When we've got solar panels, why can't we produce solar farms? Tap into that energy rather than continuing with coal burning when it is well known that this is causing CO2 into the atmosphere, which is heating the planet, which is actually causing ice caps to melt. It is creating chaos on our planet. the economic juggernaut, because it only responds to price signals. It is emotionally disconnected. It talks about service of community, but it doesn't understand real service. There's a selflessness in real service. In other words, you're putting the other ahead of yourself. It's not possible in an economic system to put others ahead of you because you want to make money to be viable economically. These two don't sit very comfortably together, the notion of serving humanity and the notion of serving oneself. Because service to self is actually out of balance with the natural system, which naturally interconnects and serves each other. That's why women go out, typically you'll find them as the volunteers. They're the ones going out and helping each other because they're more in tune with their emotions and their nature. They see others as themselves. Oh, I'll give her a hand. They've nurtured children. They're used to giving. Giving is the real abundance on the planet. People then feel that someone cares about them. Someone could say, oh, what a swan song. That's all motherhood stuff. It's not. Every child needs it. You know, when I was in the orphanages in Russia, I went to baby houses as a clown with other clowns. Now, those children, the little ones, they were between just born and probably 3 years old. I saw traumatized children in this hospital, it was actually orphaned children in a hospital. Now, the nurses couldn't get around all the children, but the children need to be hugged and touched. Do you know, in early childhood, children need to have their eyes stared into to connect with that child. You can't just work with a child in early childhood and not look into their eyes and connect with them in a loving, safe way, because the child's looking up into the eyes to get a sense of safety. In these orphanages, these children were abandoned. There was, at the time when I was in Russia, it was like 600,000, probably close to 1 million abandoned children. They quickly took them off their parents. Some of them had alcohol problems with vodka and others coming from difficult backgrounds, but apparently there was a real quickness to take the children off them and institutionalise them. These children were absolutely traumatised. If they're not okay mentally by the age, I think, of 5, some of them go crazy or what they call imbecile. That is the importance of love. Anyone who does not receive love is not able to give love. If you can't feel compassion for someone, you'll disconnect from them, and that's exactly what technology is doing. It is tuning us out, not in, to our world. We're tuning out of it. I've seen children 3 years old sitting on iPhones whilst the mother is on an iPhone too. The two of them are sitting side by side, not talking, not looking around at all the community around them, but absorbed in a game. Now, those who are producing those games, oh, well, they all choose. Well, no, you're part of social engineering. What are you engineering for here? That child's not learning very valuable socialisation. I saw twins in a stroller being given phones to play on, and they were completely tuned out. Then I saw other mothers with other children. This was all part of the same group, I might add. So the mother had put the twins to the side, kept them busy with phones. The other mothers actually were engaging with their kids. They were jumping them on their laps. The children were some were sitting on a table, watching the adults all interacting and talking. And I looked at the two worlds and I could see the difference. These ones, if they were to continue, and I even said to that mother, I'd be happy to come and talk to you about the importance, of engagement with your child, because that's how they formulate their neural networks. That's how they develop. They must have maximum contact with other people in order to learn how to be human. So we give them all these devices to keep them quiet because we're stressed. We need community around us in order to cope with the very complicated job of raising children. Now, these discussion that I've been peddling along here with has arisen out of this massive disconnect that's happened. Homeless women being killed. What happened to the man to make him mentally unwell? What was he deprived of? What did he think about himself? What was the problem? Society's got to start asking this, because the problem is inherent in a lot of families who aren't getting the appropriate inputs that they need in order to be functional human beings. They need love. They don't need criticism. They need their parents' attention, not sitting on a phone. Apparently, there are studies saying that if the mother is on the phone and the child is with her, it actually impacts the child. Let's just say that the mother then is showing them something and gets interrupted by the phone. It affects the child's development. What about brain cancer? Having these devices up against their heads. You know, what is that doing to that sense of interconnectedness with our own community? Smiling into the eyes of a person as you walk past. We used to do that all the time when I was growing up. You would never walk past someone silently. Never. That's disconnect. This is how people feel not valued. That's how they become very lonely. They think no one cares about them, which is what happened to Courtney. She didn't think anyone cared, and I don't think at times anyone has cared about my situation when I've told those in authority how I'm feeling. I've had situations of wanting to end my life and I've been ignored. I've had situations where people have sought to harm me through legal action that was untrue because I'd spoken up, spoken the truth about something. I was not engaged in appropriate dialogue in order to resolve that matter which I'd asked for. These are dysfunctions. This is not okay in a society. So I feel to sort of mention now that what we need to do is turn it around. We have to turn all this around. There needs to be, certainly in the case of, this violence that we're seeing, particularly with the homeless situation, there needs to be a Minister for Wellbeing and Homelessness. There needs to be an ability to communicate with the government to actually talk about the real needs of people that cannot be solved through throwing money at them or privatised off. We need expertise. We need housing and shelter. That has to be first priority. We've got the money to do that. But there also has to be healing and an understanding somewhere in there. Some sort of duty of care has to happen, given that homelessness is really an externality of an economic system. Who takes responsibility for that? Deep conversations have to happen because people are suffering terribly. People are suiciding. Certainly the message I've heard is that certainly men and people in the media have talked about this has got to stop. Well, then we have to look at violence in our community. We have to look at what we're being exposed to. We have to look at how our values are changing. We have to return back to, Australian content. There was far more controls over violence on television. These codes of conduct need to be more rigorously enforced, not just buying cheap programming, beaming it in and not thinking about how is that impacting on young minds, how is that impacting on how women are seen. If we're constantly being sexualised, and we're seeing more and more gratuitous violence, seeing rape scenes on television. On the internet, there are snuff movies. This is where they kill people. At where do we draw on the line here? Do we just say, oh, well, it's international now, bad luck? So those very ones who are very invested in orchestrating more violence are the ones that have the say. When do we pull back our sovereignty and say, well, this is actually not for my people, it's not good for them? When I lived in England, there was less violence on the television there, and I noticed there was a difference. I came back to Australia, I saw how influenced we were by the United States. There's a real fascination with violence there. It changes us. It makes us less sensitive to one another. We become lonelier because people don't get together. People don't trust anymore. When we have all these political figures going on about violence and terrorism, they're only creating more and more fear in the society. They're making people frightened to go out. We don't want that. We want to create a community that's happy and friendly and fun. We need to develop values education in schools. I was teaching real hopes, which is responsibility, empathy, awareness, love, honesty, oneness, peace, enjoyment, and service. I was teaching anti-bullying, conflict resolution, anti-discrimination. I was teaching children to become aware of how they exclude and include. I was showing them where our inner wealth comes from. I was teaching them about how they walk, their body language, what they communicate through that. I was showing them about war. I was showing them about peace. I was asking questions and getting them to tell me what they thought about these things. This was experiential education. Children had transformative changes in the work that I was doing, and I was teaching as a clown. This is bringing it in the arts. This is using the arts to transform children, to become more aware and awake to the world they're in, to love themselves and love each other. This is critical if we're going to create a culture of peace. But for the moment, we're still upholding a culture of violence. And these terrible deaths that are happening here, obviously for the women, for us it's violence against women, which is a real big issue that's coming out through the Royal Commissions and the child abuse stuff. This is a sickness in our society that has to be dealt with. And again, harking back to the wars around the world, this disconnect from the suffering of the civilians, 90% fatalities in wars. Why are we creating a defence industry here? Under whose impetus is that occurring? It's certainly not coming from the need for Australia to defend itself. It doesn't need to. The amount of money, $200 billion over 10 years, it's $1 trillion a year spent on military worldwide, if not more. Imagine using that money to improve mental health, using that money for potable water, using that money for sanitation, for cropping, for greening deserts, for climate change. Imagine that. We have choices we can make here. Some say it's all about economics. No, it's not all about economics. I know, I was trained in economics. It's not all about economics. In fact, that's a real blindsider. By all means, cost account out. By all means, cost benefit. By all means, look at market configurations, but don't make that the primary modus operandi of looking at your society. Statistics mean nothing when you're wanting to end your life. We need self-determination. We need empowerment in order to create a healthy society where that common abundance, that common wealth can be generated. But in the current global economic situation, we are traversing tipping points environmentally. Societies around the world are becoming more educated. They're starting to question their governments more. The corruption is the moral void that is enabling more covert and overt violence to occur, where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. This is not balance. This is not equality. We have to start to change. I absolutely appeal to everybody to give what I'm saying some thought. Even if you're tempted to sit and judge me and go, oh, that's a bit this, that's a bit that, I ask you just to hear me out without an internal narrative. Just listen to what I'm saying. I have travelled widely. I have seen a lot. I've interviewed lots of people. I've experienced personally a lot. So what I'm sharing with you is a heartfelt appeal to start to discuss co-creating together a culture of peace so the violence stops and we start to take responsibility for our negativity, our unresolved conflicts, and our own deception, self-deception and collective deception. Because these children that are coming up right now, they need to feel that they've got a future. We can talk sustainability on electrical grids, then it's not sustainability, it's still generating from coal. That is self-deception that's being governed by market interests. We have to actually have a discussion about the power of multinational companies and how they're shaping our world and the impact on human beings. Is this in the public interest? I feel that compassion is in the public interest. Love is in the public interest. Empathy is in the public interest. Courtney is a young 25-year-old woman who was absolutely bludgeoned to death. She's come out of a situation where her needs have not been dealt with and met. She hasn't been protected or helped. She is indeed a wake-up call for our society, and I believe she's had a major impact on my life already. So please support Homeless Lives Matter. Thank you very much for listening to my appeal. I really felt strongly to share it. Take care of yourselves. I love you all. Bye.